Hi guys, I'm Jim from the Old Warlock. Today we're not going to be looking at any old games, any new games. Today we're going to be baking some bread. As you probably know, that junk food thing at your next D&D session is probably going to get out of control if it hasn't already gotten out of control. I've had friends who have gotten so bored with their standard junk food fare that they've taken to putting cheese whiz on chocolate donuts, things like that. And we thought here at the Old Warlock that what we might try and do is make some bread, some medieval bread that we can take to our next D&D session that might up our game a little bit in terms of that whole junk food thing. So today we're going to be making a simple recipe. It's a barley and ale bread, and I've asked my friend Frank to come along and give me a hand with this. Between the two of us, we should be able to knock this out in pretty short order. So stay tuned, and we will. No thanks, bud. Stay tuned, and we'll get started on making some medieval barley and ale bread. So why barley and ale bread? Well, barley was actually the grain of choice back in the medieval period, and ale was used in a lot of recipes as well. I like to think that this recipe we're using for this particular loaf of bread is something that might have been used at a monastery because it has a little bit of honey in it, and monasteries would have had apiaries or beehives that would have allowed them access to honey. They also had in a lot of monasteries there were people who produced ale. So those two things combined, I like to think that the monks would have had easy access to some of the ingredients for this bread. But to get started, we're going to combine all of the flours together and some salt, and I'm going to turn that over to Frank, and then I'm going to work on some of the other things, getting them ready. Keep in mind though, this is actually a really simple recipe. If it looks intimidating at the beginning, you'll soon see that it's not as hard as you might think. So the first thing we need to do is we're mixing 8 ounces of barley flour with 1 pound of whole wheat flour. So once we get that done, we're going to combine it with a teaspoon of salt, and then we're going to mix it in the bowl until everything is good and combined well together. So there's our 8 ounces of barley flour. And now we're going to get a full pound of this whole wheat flour. And at the end of the day, this is going to make 2 loaves. So if this seems like a lot, you're getting quite a bit of bang for your flour. So there we have a pound of the whole wheat flour. We're going to mix that in. And then we also need to add in a teaspoon of salt. There we go. And then we need to mix all this together. This isn't rocket science, it's pretty straightforward, but you want to do it enough times to where you get the salt evenly distributed through the flour. Okay. Now I need to take half an ounce of this yeast, and we're going to mix that with the dark ale. I use this Fleischmann's Active Dry Yeast, and it seems to work pretty well. So let's dish out a half an ounce of that. Excuse me. It actually takes quite a bit of yeast. So we're going to take that, and then we're going to mix that with the ale. I'm going to have Frank help me out with the ale here. So Frank's going to pour in 1/3 of a cup of this, and then we're going to mix that, as I said, with yeast. Frank, I think we're good, buddy. I think that's maybe just a little bit too much. But excuse me, I'll take that. There, buddy, go. So we've got just over 1/3 of a cup of ale in this measuring cup here. If you want to have a stronger ale taste, it's okay to add just a little bit more ale to the mix. If you want to do that, though, we also have to add some warm water to this here in just a couple seconds. So you want to decrease the water a little bit if you want that stronger ale taste. Keep in mind with this, the bread that you're going to end up coming up with at the end of this process is not going to is not going to taste like anything you're going to find over in the local supermarket, and it's not going to look like anything that you've not going to look like anything that you'd find in the local supermarket either. It's also not going to be like one of those designer breads you'd find at a fancy bakery. So now we'll take our cup of, or our third plus cup of ale, and we're going to mix that in with the yeast, just a little bit of it, about like that. And then what we're going to do, Frank, if you'll do this, just take that and mix that up until it's got kind of a pasty consistency. You might want to hold on to the bowl there while you do it. There you go, a little faster, a little faster. Okay, too fast, too fast, too fast. A little slower. There you go. Just keep going on that. It's going to start to thicken up here in a minute. Something else to keep in mind, if you don't want to have any alcohol in your bread, it's not like you're going to get drunk off this, but you will taste the ale. But for those of you who might be younger, who won't have access to an alcoholic ale, you can find some alcohol-free ales at your local liquor store if you can get somebody who can go in there to buy some for you. Okay, I think that's good. So then we're going to take what's left of the ale and we're going to mix that in with what we just created with the yeast. Give that just a couple of stirs, make sure that that's okay. Then we're going to take 2 teaspoons of honey and we're going to mix that in as well. There's 1. And here's 2. And then we're going to mix that with a little bit of warm water. Frank, could you get me some warm water there? That's a little bit too much there, bud. So there's 1 cup. Let's mix up this honey just a little bit more. And we're going to pour in 1 cup of the warm water. Then we're going to take another cup of warm water. Add that in. Maybe not the entire thing because we need to keep in mind that we added some extra ale to it, so we need to decrease the water. Anyway, give this a couple stirs just for the sake of doing it. And then Frank, if you want to pour that into there. Excellent. And then we need to mix this together. So I'm just going to use my hands. If you want to toss it into a blender, you can do that, or a mixer, you can do that, but you really don't have to, because again, this is a pretty simple recipe. There's a lot of room for error in here. Just going to do the best I can to get this all mixed together. When you're doing this, you really want to mix this through thoroughly, because if you don't, you're going to get these weird taste pockets in your bread. Did you ever have barley ale bread, Frank? Yeah, you have. And so this is about the consistency that you want this bread to be. It's a little bit sticky, it's a little bit soggy, but it's not so wet that it just kind of falls apart in your hand. But you can see it's settling just a little bit, but not a lot. So this is actually a pretty good mixture of bread. But at this point in time, we're just going to cover this with a piece of plastic and we're going to let it sit for an hour, and we'll go off and do something, and then we'll come back, and when it's about maybe almost twice as big of a lump of dough as it is now, it'll be ready to do the next stage, but we'll be just about done by the time it reaches that point. So we're going to go off and do something else for an hour, and we'll be back. Okay, so we've had an hour pass, and if you we've had an hour pass, and if you look, you can see that all those things that we put into this dough have reacted chemically, and they've made the dough that we had expand to about twice the size it was before. So what we have to do now is we have to take this and we're just going to divide it into 2 chunks, and then we have to let it sit for another half an hour or so. But first, you want to put some vegetable shortening on the bottom of the pans that you're going to cook this stuff in. You don't need an awful lot. You don't even really have to do this. It just helps keep the bread from sticking to the pan as it bakes. So there you go, and then we're also going to take just a little bit of flour, just a little bit, put it on there like that, and then we're just going to move this around in there so that all that vegetable shortening we just put in there gets covered with a real thin layer of flour. So there you go. Got those ready. I'm gonna take this. We're just gonna undo all of that stuff that we just went through to get it to expand. We're gonna kind of knock it back down a little bit. You will notice that this smells a bit like a brewery. Which I guess makes sense because we have a bunch of ale in there. So, I've kind of knocked that back down to its original size. I'm just going to grab onto it, pull it in half, like that. Make that into a round ball. Slap it in the center there like that. And do the same thing with this one. And then you're just gonna drape those on top of this, one on each. Or you could do one over both. And then we're going to let that sit for another half an hour, and then we're going to put it in the oven for 20 minutes, and then we'll have our medieval barley ale bread ready to go. We'll be back in a half an hour. Hey guys, welcome back. We've been gone for about a half an hour, but during that time, the bread that we put underneath this towel, you can see it's flattened out a bit. This is about what it's going to look like when we're done. So again, don't expect something like what you're going to get out of the grocery store. So a few minutes ago, I turned up the oven to 450 degrees Fahrenheit. That's like 230 degrees centigrade, I think. So Frank's going to put those both in the oven, and then in about 20 minutes we'll have 2 loaves of bread ready to go. We'll be back in 20 minutes. So the bread has been in the oven for 20 minutes at a very high temperature, but it should be ready to go. Yes, it is. So I'm just going to grab this one. You got there, Frank. Set that there. Set that there. And as you can see, that little dusting of flour that we put on the bottom of the pan makes it so these kind of slide around, they're not stuck. So what I'm going to do is, be careful, these pans are extremely hot. Drop that out. Drop that out. And there you have it. That's our medieval barley and ale bread. This is not going to go well with something like strawberry jam if you want to put that on it. It's got kind of a bitter taste to it, or an ale-like taste. So I mean, it's a good taste, but it's not something you're going to want to combine with something sweet. What I suggest is using some kind of a medieval cheese. Cheddar cheese is something that people believe was in existence back in the medieval period. I really like this with something called Old Crock cheese. It comes out of Australia and it's a sharp cheddar. All we usually do is tear a piece off, and it's medieval bread. You don't want to slice it up. You want to tear a piece off, cut a piece of the cheese off, and then you eat them together, and you've got yourself an actually really good snack for your next D&D night or any game night that you happen to have. So anyway, there you go. I'm Jim from the Old Warlock. Thanks to Frank for helping me out on this entire video. If you have any questions, send me something here from, flip the switch, turn the dial or whatever. Just send me an email or a message, and then I will put a PDF of this recipe, which again is really, really simple, as you've seen. I'll put a PDF of the recipe on our website. You can download it from there and try and make one of these loaves of bread for your very own, and then you'll be the envy of all your friends at your next game night. Anyway, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Keep your sword on free.